tradition of sharing of the heart and order of the house may have elements in common with theological reflection, contemplative dialogue, lectio divina, communal discernment. But sharing of the heart and order of the house is different from all of these. It is unique and central to Sisters of St. Joseph. This communal prayer practice undergirds all we do and leads us to do anything of which a woman is capable to serve the dear neighbor.
It's not about me. The sharing and the process, this prayer practice is not about me. It's about God's movement. So I don't want to get stuck in my feelings. I want to move further on to what's God saying and doing in and through those feelings. You know, what is the invitation? It's all about noticing God's ongoing creative, healing, unifying action as that occurs within the substance of my life.
For me, as a sister of St. Joseph, community is very important, and life-giving, intentional, compassionate community where we know each other is important. And with State of the Heart, that's a way in. I think that's powerful. I know that's powerful.
The State of the Heart really is about articulating that experience of where God's moving in my life and in my heart and in my experience. It's walking around believing that the world is saturated with the sacred, and I need to pay attention to that because there's invitation for me all day long, every day. So here we are. We're stepping into and receiving this deep communion because I'm sharing the bread of my life and you're sharing the bread of your life, and we're much more hopefully easily able then to recognize when I leave that circle the myriad of ways that God's acting in my life that if we didn't share together, I might miss.
I think this prayer practice, which is basically what it is a communal prayer practice, can really help us in a number of ways. First of all, I think it helps to keep me personally, on my toes, awake, to noticing where God is really moving in my life, in all of the aspects of my life. When I am able to bring that to the people I'm going to be sharing with, the sisters I'm going to be sharing with, and when I can hear how they are really experiencing God moving in their lives, gradually I really begin to catch a deeper glimpse, a deeper appreciation, a sense of wonder and awe of how God moves, in myself, in others. I become more and more aware of those times when I am leaning into God's grace and when I am not leaning into God's grace.
I think if we really take it seriously, if we really engage it, then it can be transformational for sure.
I think still God touches us in wherever we are in life.
First of all, one of the things that we say all the time in terms of sharing this with the novitiate community is to say that the work of State of the Heart happens long before we gather in the chapel on Sunday night. The work of State of the Heart happens in your prayer every day, in your time of stepping back and saying, how am I recognizing God at work in my life? How am I experiencing God's?
It begins with our own personal prayer and reflection on how I am encountering God in and through the various aspects of life. My really taking that long, loving look at what is real in my life and noticing what stirs in me as I encounter all the ordinary stuff of life. And in my own prayer, recognizing that those stirrings, those feelings are neutral in and of themselves. but it is the way in which God's Spirit tries to communicate with me. God's trying to tell me something in and through what stirs within me, tell me something about myself, about others, all creation. And so then it remains for me to reflect on, well, how am I responding to all of that? I'm always in the flow of grace. So am I going with the flow, or am I kind of going against the current? So all of that is kind of the starting point, my reflecting on my life experience and what's going on there.
In the novitiate, we keep it very simple. Again, assuming that people come prepared and having reflected on the state of their heart prior to being there, then we gather in a circle, and we start with some quiet to put ourselves back in touch with whatever the fruit of our reflection, the whatever it is that we would like to express. But we do take some time in quiet. Sometimes we begin with the song. Oftentimes it was simply in quiet. We're responding to some question that's posed by the leader of prayer that, again, would be some variation on how have you noticed and been attentive to the presence of God at work in your life this week? What's God been up to in experience and in relationship with you this past week? What threads are you noticing? So we may have multiple ways to ask that question. It's all centered around that similar God question. And then we pause in between as people share, then we just allow for some quiet space. And then another person shares and we continue until everyone has shared.
So we're really lifting the veil on God's face for one another. That's really what we're doing. We are really just revealing the way God moves in all of our lives. We try to listen in a way that we not only are listening to the person, but we notice what that elicits within myself. So as I listen, what's going on in me? Which is why then we take a moment or two to just be still between each one sharing, so that we can take that step back and say, well, what stirs in me as I listen to this? Because that's God's movement right then and there, also inviting me to something.
It's a process of reflecting on how God has acted in my life. And then when you share that, it's how God is acting in our lives. And that's, of course, the state of the house.
Then we would pause and take some time to really allow what we just heard to sink in our heart, and then ask the question, what are we hearing? What connection can we see? How can we hear God inviting us to a deeper living of this mission of unioning love? What's coming together for us as a community? What are we aware of in terms of a dissonance?
This is where we say, when I heard that, this is what happened in me. This is how I sense. This is what I heard in the group. I consider what struck me, what stirred in me as I heard that, what questions it raised in me, how I felt challenged by what somebody said. And I listened, and so then we listen to how is God leading and inviting and challenging us as a group, and what is the next right step for unioning love? What's the next step that we take? So we listen to one another and we come up with threads or patterns. How do we sense God moving in us in the group, as from what we heard? Is there anything coming together as I listen for us as we listen? Is there a common invitation for the group? Is there any invitation to deepening union among us or through us as a group? So where are we being invited? And so we share our responses in an informal and conversational way then, and then we conclude with gratitude. But we gather those threads. and then take them to the next level. So that's the order of the house.
Don't think this is going to be perfect from the beginning, or are there going to be any great aha moments to this. We only learn to do it and become appreciative of what it can do for us by the consistent practice. It keeps us alert. It keeps us more attentive to where God might be moving in life when we know we're going to come together to talk about it. You know, there is something about that it just slowly begins to condition us to reflect a little more deeply on all of life. Where's the opportunity here? I just think over time, it really unites us, and it unites us in staying focused on what it is we're about. We're really talking about how we are participating in the mission, how the mission is taking on flesh in us. And yes, that's in our life together, as well as in our life beyond it. The mission never ends for us, because the mission is primarily the quality of our presence. The mission is primarily being a presence that unites, which we do in and through various works, spiritual and corporal works of mercy, to the extent in which we are able. But one thing we have in common is the mission. The one thing we have in common is this call to be a presence that unites, to give flesh to unioning love. And we can do that we do it to the last breath.